These are the SLC fanboys.
SLC fanboys, welcome into another episode of the podcast. I'm Andy Farnsworth, joined by Aaron Zundel, and returning for another round is one of our comic book and superhero experts, Josh Leavitt. Josh, welcome back. Aaron,
thank you.
Good to have you in.
Always happy to be here.
All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about the Netflix series The Punisher. Now, this is going to be our deep dive. Now, if you haven't already watched or listened to our review, which was spoiler-free, then this one you're going to want to go do that first. If you haven't decided whether or not to watch the series and you don't want to know what happens with all the details, go watch that particular podcast or go listen to that one and get an idea. This is for people who've already seen it and want to, get more about it, or who are really interested in the Punisher, or who may need all the details before they watch the series. And I do know people that are like that. But that just a fair warning, we are going to be talking heavily about spoilers in this particular episode. Disclaimer, however, given that this is the Punisher, if you're not familiar with the Punisher, Josh is wearing his shirt, and it has a giant skull on it, if you're with us on the audio version.
And he's called the Punisher.
He's not called the very nice patter on the backer, okay? So there is a very mature level to the Punisher, his history, and oh my goodness, in some of the clips, we're just warning you now, this is not a family-friendly podcast. If you're joining us on the video, this one would probably be rated TV, MA, or R. Or R if you're looking at the movie. So watch this one at your own risk. We just want to give you the fair warning as we talk and get started about
But for those who do like lighter material, we do have a Coco review coming up and a Coco podcast. And we will be doing video for that as well. So
so that's fair. So that we're not just all about the blood and the gore. No, but this particular one, I mean, you can't ignore the Punisher. It's too big of a deal both for Marvel's TV series, and for, just comic book culture in general. We have to talk about the Punisher. We've talked about the Defenders. We've talked about the others. So we got to talk about the Punisher. So let's get into it.
This is a series with Jon Bernthal as the Punisher. This comes on the heels of the MCU, as you said. I mean, takes place in the same universe as the Avengers and Thor and Iron Man. But also this is the Netflix side. So this is Daredevil, Luke Cage, the Defenders.
The street level Marvel universe.
Obviously, the Punisher was introduced in Daredevil season 2. We talked about this a little bit in our review. I thought overall this was a great show. It had its problems, but we're not really here to review the show, more to just talk about it. But I think for anybody who's interested, who maybe just watched this or has interest in it, I mean, let's start with with the history of the Punisher. I mean, who is he, Josh?
So the Punisher he's a Marvel superhero, although I use the term superhero lightly there.
Yeah, really loosely.
He's a vigilante is really what he is. He would be, in many respects, I think, akin to Batman of the DC universe. With one huge exception is
he's like the mirror image of Batman, I would say, because the big difference is, whereas Batman's whole ethos is to not kill, Punisher's ethos is, I'm going to wipe these suckers out. And he started out as a Vietnam veteran in the comics.
In the comics, yes.
Whose family was killed. So there you've got good motivation for that, which he then decides he's sick and tired of the people who do this. In this case, I think it was a mafia hit that took out his family in the comics. Yep. And the mafia, of course, is above the law because they have the money so they can get away with stuff. So he doesn't believe in the court system. He believes in eye for an eye.
Personal justice.
Or head for a head, or body part for a body part, or all your body part for my little body part.
Yeah, no, he is the ultimate. I mean, he is the last stop in violence, or the last word in violence in the Marvel universe. His first appearance was actually as a villain in Spider-Man in 1974, Spider-Man 129.
There's a famous cover where he's got Spider-Man in his
scope sights.
Yep.
But he very quickly established, readers took to him very quickly and very quickly liked him. And so they turned him into a hero, and we use that term loosely, and he's taken many incarnations over the years. Yes. But his thing is, the Punisher's thing is kill them all, kill them without mercy.
Because they never show mercy to their victims.
Right. And
give them what they deserve in his mind.
Exactly. And the characterization of the Punisher has changed throughout time. Yeah. He's always a little different. It's interesting that you draw the parallel to Batman. There have been some Punisher-Batman crossovers when DC and Marvel have done crossovers. I used to think he was closer to Batman. Upon thinking about it, I think he's Wolverine and Batman are probably closer together than the Punisher and Batman, just because of Wolverine's pain, but the way he chooses not to kill.
No, in terms of methodology, I would definitely liken him more to Wolverine. just kill without regret, without remorse. And you do that.
No, I mean
because it's your
Batman's
mission.
more like Wolverine.
Oh,
I think Batman's more like Wolverine than he is like the Punisher.
I can see that. I see the vigilantism.
Well, I look
akin to
at Batman and Punisher being similar because they are both human. They don't have they don't have a superpower.
That's what I was
that
going
sets
for.
them apart.
Well,
that's why
true.
I was kind of getting the vibe.
They're humans in a superhuman world. They're surrounded by people who have so much more power.
There are definitely parallels both ways, but as you can see on the monitor here, I mean, the Punisher was even included in the old 1990s Spider-Man cartoon. I mean, the Punisher is a well-known superhero, quote unquote, in the Marvel universe. He has his own comics line. He has had his own comics line forever.
That's
multiples. And he comes
He's been
in and
killed.
Out. Yeah, he has. Came
in the
back
comics.
as a zombie once.
So the thing that was interesting to me about the Punisher, at least historically, is he came out in a time when the comics code was still in effect. So he was supposed to be like the cutting edge, but once the comics code kind of went away in the early 90s, they really, Frank Miller.
It was in the 80s.
But Frank Miller, when he kind of loosened the grip on Daredevil and made Daredevil a little bit more violent of a superhero, you look at Punisher's early appearances in the Spider-Man comics, and yes, he's got the gun, and yes, he wants to shoot the people, but when they kind of loosened those things in the early 90s and you had Punisher Warzone and Punisher War Journal, and it was about the time that John Romita Jr. started drawing him, they just went to the wall, like die-cut covers with bullets flying, and Punisher like really wiped him out. And that's, to me, that was when I felt like, at least in my experience, that's when his popularity really spiked, is when they could really turn him into what they were trying to imply he was. Then he actually got to turn into that.
You know what? I would agree with that, but I think it actually started earlier. I remember buying, and the comics code came down before the 90s. It came down in the early 80s. And I remember...
Well, did it? I'm pretty sure it went to the early 90s.
It did. I mean, it may have, but I'll tell you what, the comics that I was reading in the late 80s, maybe it was still officially enforced, and I wish I'd had the information in front of me, but I'll tell you, it wasn't being enforced, because I had Punisher comics as a kid in the 1980s that show him gunning down, gangbangers in the streets of New York with blood flying everywhere and smashed faces and everything else.
Keep in mind, there was always a really weird thing in comics, which is that you could show as much blood as you wanted, but it couldn't be red. There was something about the fact that they couldn't show red blood.
Really?
I can't remember if this blood was red or not. I think that it was. It was shocking to me as a child.
Which I think was one of the reasons why they went black and white so much, was to show that.
Yeah. But I think the point being is I agree with your timeline on the progression. And by the time you hit the mid-90s, you had like the Marvel Maxed series and the Marvel Knights series.
Well, that's what makes this cartoon Punisher interesting, because they put him in the cartoon to expose him to a bunch of kids at the same time that his he's going nuts on the big screen, or he's going nuts in the comics and killing all kinds of people. So that's interesting. It was kind of like the RoboCop problem of the late 80s, when they're selling RoboCop toys to kids for an R-rated movie that there's no way they should get.
There were a lot of those Rambo
Rambo
toys, Aliens toys.
But nevertheless, it kept the Punisher being interesting and relevant to people who wanted to find out about him. And this was the time when my generation and the generation before me are now staying mature, but they didn't stop buying comics. They still wanted to buy them. And they wanted something that met their adult sensibilities. And the Punisher, Wolverine, over in DC you had Lobo, and I think Deathstroke even a little bit. But suddenly you had an appetite and an ability to provide it for him. And that's where I think the Punisher really cemented. I wasn't surprised at all, especially the way things have loosened now with the Netflix ability to go even darker than a TV series. I knew Punisher was coming sooner rather than later.
Well, and he is sometimes. I mean, in the comics, the thing about Frank is that and we'll get into this, in a bit, but his mindset kind of changes. I mean, his characterization varies widely over the years.
Yeah, depending on who's writing, who's interpreting.
Sure.
All right, so now we've seen this Netflix version of the Punisher. In our next segment, we're going to talk about how do we think this ranks with other iterations of the Punisher who's appeared on the big and small screen.